Welcome everyone to the May meeting for the Landscape Inspectors Association. Thank you for attending. As some of you were hearing, we were speaking with Diane, and we're continuing to meet in the Zoom format for a couple reasons. The leading one is still COVID, and it's not a lot of people, or not everyone is comfortable getting back into one room and in close proximity with other people. So we feel that for the next couple months, and I would venture to say probably the better part of 2022, we're going to continue with the monthly meetings in a virtual format. Moving forward, as we look at the seminar, we are going to do a 50-50 again this year, where we're going to have the half day live and in person at a park where we can have adequate spacing, and we can cover our outdoor portions, the trimming and the tree grading and things along those lines. And then the indoor portion will be a Zoom format. So that's what we're looking towards now. We have not yet picked the date. We will be, we've got a couple really good speakers. I'm very happy to say lined up. That is one thing about this. It's also easier to get really quality speakers, as we have today, via Zoom, as opposed to having someone drive over to Broward County or Dade County for a meeting. So we're trying to pick the best of both worlds. We want the ease of a Zoom meeting. However, as an association, we also want to be able to look at members and have some of that interaction that is so important to our profession in the green industry, and just the camaraderie that's built between all the different people that are represented. You know, that's the beauty of LIAF. Not only is it landscape inspectors and urban foresters and municipal employees, but it's also contractors, it's also university people, it's also suppliers. We are, as we've said oftentimes, we are the umbrella group, and we strive to be the umbrella group for the green industry in Florida. We've done a very good job. We've got good reputation out there. We've got good representatives. To be a certified landscape inspector right now does indeed carry a lot of weight. So as Kevin, I'm going to release this to Kevin here in a minute, can tell you, we've got good participation in people that are signing up to take the test to become certified landscape inspectors. And I encourage all of you that are not to consider doing that. I will also warn you that it's not a give me, it's not a slam dunk. This is a tough test. It is supposed to reflect your knowledge of the green industry. It's all things that can be learned. It's things that other members will share, and it's things that it's the responsibility of Kevin and Peggy and all the other board members to help disseminate and get in front of you all so that you are aware of it, along with hopefully some self-motivation where y'all are going online and looking at different links and different points of interest so that you're up to date on the green industry goings on. We encourage everybody to become certified. We will help you become certified all the way down to handing you the test. Then you're on your own. The test is the test, and the test is a fairly representative, well-meaning, and I'm not wrong in saying a challenging test to take. So Kevin, with that, let me turn it over to you, and you can kind of bring us up to speed a little bit on most recent tests and future endeavors. Go ahead.
Sure, and hopefully everybody can hear me all right. This is always so weird. So we did have our spring examination. We had, I think, 12 to 14 people take it. We're just getting the data in from Mike and Henry. Mike Orphanides has taken a long-awaited trip to Greece. Apparently he inherited a villa on the Mediterranean. No, I'm sorry, I didn't think that really happened. But he has gone, he's gone for 2 weeks. When he gets back, I've got some of the information. We should be able to get this all out to our people. But we had a great response. We had some great attendance. One of the things that we are seeing is, as William referenced, is the challenge of test is it's not a slam dunk. is grades and standards. And I think between Mike and Henry and myself, and perhaps some of the other board members, we want to expand our dissemination of grades and standards, understanding and awareness, and really being able to do that well. If there's one thing that landscape inspectors or certified landscape inspectors should be able to do, it's grade trees and plants the way they need to be graded. So that being said, we're talking about doing some additional education days, maybe even half-day field days, or maybe even whole-day field days. So that would be wide open to everybody, by the way. Anybody on this call, anybody who's a member, I mean, honestly, I don't even care if you are a member. I would love for you to be there. I think I would love for anybody who wants to take the certification exam, who's a little bit on the fence and you want to just come to the review, by all means, just come to the review. We are not some egalitarian thing where this is, you gotta do this. And we really want to get you certified. We want to help you across the finish line. As I told the attendees in that review and in the exam, we're not, and I'm not bashing ISA here, but we ask you to pay for the dues for the test and maintain your membership. But once you've paid for it, unless it takes you 5 years to pass, I don't think I'm going to ask you to get, pay for the exam again. So it's not a thing we hit you up for all the time. You pay a one-time charge. We help get you there, I hope. Just maintain your dues. Side note, if you haven't paid your dues, please pay your dues. You can do that online. It's very easy. www.landscapeinspectors.org. And you can go there and pay online. So wanted to just say a little bit about the certification. We're talking about doing something in Dade, and I don't know if Henry's on the call, but we want to do it sooner than later. So we're not going to be doing a late season one down here. We're shooting for a late season third exam of the year in possibly Tampa, if we can get the extension offices over there to help. And perhaps Ms. Cohen knows some people over there who could help us in that endeavor, but we'll get to her next. And I just wanted to pitch that off to everybody. And again, if I can provide any information on that, let me know. Also, I was just thinking, if you haven't seen the 2022 grades and standards, let me know. Shoot an email to exam@landscapeinspectors.org, and I will shoot you the PDF. I think it's about 10 megabytes, which is the max I think most people can receive. And I see Diane just made a note that it's a big file. It is a big file, but I've got a copy of it and I'll send it to anybody who wants it. So just shoot us a note. Let us know how we can help. All right. Thanks.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin, I don't think the grades and standards are proprietary. Yeah, they can be. Okay, so maybe we can get Richard to put them on the a link to it on the website, so that people can have it there.
That was an excellent plan as well.
You know, we've talked for a number of years about the importance of the grades and standards to landscape inspection. And it really doesn't matter which side you're on, if you're representing a municipality or you're a contractor, a grower, whatever the case is. The grades and standards are what really drive our industry. And it's the test. I mean, the LIAF test may be difficult, but grades and standards are the really hard test. And I think that leads to more confrontation and issues than anything else, because obviously, if it were done correctly, the growers would grow to the standards. You as a contractor would have it super easy, because all you'd have to do is basically go pick it up. Now, what should happen is, as Peggy, who's not yet on, always says, you know, whoever your person that's picking up the material, they should also be familiar with the grades and standards, so they can be looking at that material so it never gets on the truck if it isn't Florida grade number 1. Once that occurs, it's brought to the job site. Hopefully the foreperson there can look at it and also quickly judge if it's Florida grade number 1, and then it comes down to the landscape inspector. So if we do this right, by the time it gets to the landscape inspector, they will be deep down that rope that it should just be a slam dunk, unless something was damaged along the way or somebody really missed something, that yes, we are comfortable that all this material come in meets the grades and standards. Super important. We owe it to everybody we represent, the people that are purchasing the plants, owe it to the people that they're getting paid to do the landscape for. The people that are municipal employees owe it to whatever businesses or homes that they represent. That material is Florida grade #1, because remember, the overall point of that is the University of Florida and a lot of other groups' best scenario for trees, shrubs, ground covered vine, turf to do well in our Florida landscapes. And that's the ideal. You know, you can just take codominance. If we know the problem codominance causes. There's enough research done all the way back from Ed Gilman and beyond that show that there's no doubt that codominance is an issue. So to have something go in 2022 with an obvious codominant situation is really unprofessional, or is really unacceptable. So it's our responsibility to take those grades and standards, to know those grades and standards, and to embellish them as one of the base documents for LIAF. And we want you all to be familiar with them. I made a commitment to Kevin and some others, again, recently, that we will, as part of a lot of our meetings and seminars, we'll go through it. I don't want to say it's redundant at all, but we want to bring it about in different ways, and we want to get it in people's hands, and we want people to be able to see exactly what it is, where they're grading in front of somebody like Mike Orphanides, Dr. Orphanides, who knows and helps write those standards, so that if there are questions, we'll be able to say right away, how is this interpreted? What was meant by this? So we can narrow those issues going down the road, and we can be the professionals that know and implement the grades and standards as they're meant to be. Okay, that being said, was there anything else I want to cover real quick? I heard Kevin say about dues. That's a stern fatherly look, please. Yeah, get that in. I believe that is it. I don't see Peggy on, so I would ask for a day chapter update, but I don't see her. Peggy, if you're there, please identify yourself, and afterwards I will get you on for a day chapter update. With that being said, we're super fortunate today. Our guest speaker, as you all saw from the flyer that went out, Hamertal Cohen, Dr. Cohen. I read an article that she did in Pest Control Magazine and was very impressed, and put me back thinking about some of the insects that we know, and we know they're an issue, but we forget about them. We don't have an idea how to do anything other than just eradicate, spray more, kill more. And I think with time permitting, Dr. Cohen is going to be able to get into some of the things like pollinators, and I think the two play hand in hand. If we just eradicate everything in the landscape, it also eradicates a lot of things we don't want to get rid of. So that's enough for me. Dr. Cohen, if you'd like to introduce yourself and tell everybody a little bit about yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Hamertal, and I'm the commercial horticulture agent in Collier County. And my primary job is to support the green industry here. We've been really ramping up our classes so that folks can get their pesticide licenses and get them renewed. I'm also really interested and passionate about conservation of endangered insects. And so prior to coming here, I worked with pollinators, with wild bees and honeybees on really large monoculture farms in the California Central Valley. And I was studying, why are these bees declining? How can we change some of our agricultural practices to support them while still maintaining yields and finding practices that are effective and feasible for folks. So it's been really great coming here to Florida. I've been here for a little under a year now. And so, yeah, today my goal, let me get my slides going. Today, my goal, no, wait one sec. Is to share with you, does everyone see that okay? I'm gonna go with, yes, great. About some of the pests that, I've come across. And I know that you guys have probably heard about a lot of these pests before, but my goal is to provide some new facts or maybe some new information that you didn't know. And I will be addressing how can we manage these insects, and also talking a lot about natural enemies and predators and ways that we can sustainably approach some of these pests. And then if there's time, I will talk about some of the pollinators that are here in Florida as well. Okay, so I feel like everybody knows the eastern lubber because it's so conspicuous. But something I didn't know was that the common name, the word lubber, is derived from an Old English word, lobre, which means lazy and clumsy. And I think that's a great word to describe this slow moving grasshopper. It walks and crawls around. It's very large and colorful, and it's found all throughout the eastern US. And it has lots of really funny nicknames. In various states, it's called graveyard grasshopper, devil's horse, and giant locust. But the problem with the lubber is that it has a broad host range. It seems like they pretty much eat everything and anything. I started seeing these grasshoppers hatch here in early spring. And when they're small, they're black with colored banding. And they're also found in groups and aggregations. They're social. As they become older and go through their life history, they become solitary individuals, and they'll stay solitary throughout adulthood. And that's what I'm seeing now, is I only find them as solitary individuals when I see them. This is a very, very unpleasant insect. Not many things kill it naturally. Eating it causes animals to get sick or even die. The loggerhead shrike, the bird pictured here, is the only known predator of the grasshopper. It decapitates the grasshopper and impales it on thorns or on a fence, and then it leaves it out in the sun to detox and dry out, and then it can eat it. This bird is found here year round. But it's not enough by itself to get rid of our grasshoppers. Something that I think a lot of people don't know is that there's actually flies that are undeterred by the lubber's toxic defenses. There are some species of flies that are called parasitic flies or parasitoids. They lay their eggs inside of other insects, and then their eggs will hatch and develop inside of their host, eventually killing it, kind of like the movie Alien. And there's been some studies that have collected adult lubbers and found these flies inside of them. And I saw one study that estimated that about 60 to 70% of all lubbers eventually get parasitized by flies. This does happen during adulthood. So, the insects have still had plenty of time to eat your plants before the flies get to them, but it does keep populations down over time. So these insects are considered serious pests because they defoliate plants. And really the best management strategy is to just capture and physically remove the hoppers, especially when they're young. It's really much easier. I find in the evenings when they're young, they aggregate on warm surfaces like asphalt, and you can just like sweep them all up. Insecticides don't really work well on these grasshoppers. There are some that work, carbaryl or bifenthrin, but the application only works when the hoppers are young, and it needs to be applied to the actual grasshopper. And then there's some baits that are available as well that have insecticides that the hoppers eat. But really the best thing to do is, as you see them, grab them and chuck them in a bucket of soapy water, or you can put them in a plastic baggie and then put them in the freezer to die as well. Okay, let's move on to another pest, Rugose spiraling whitefly. This is one that I've been getting a lot of calls about this past year in Collier County. So this whitefly was found in 2009 in Miami-Dade County, and I think it was found on Gumbo Limbo. And that was the first report of this insect in the US. We think it's originally from Central America. And this is not the same whitefly that caused dieback in ficus hedges. This whitefly has a very broad host range, from palms to woody ornamentals to fruits. And it's been seen on Gumbo Limbo, it's been seen on black olive, copperleaf, even Brazilian pepper, live oak, mango. It's also been reported on palm trees, including areca palm and coconut. And the female whitefly, she lays her eggs in a spiral pattern on the leaves and deposits like a white waxy substance on her eggs. And that's what gives the whitefly its name, the spiraling whitefly. So the most noticeable symptoms that you have an infestation are those spiraling, white egg masses or a bunch of white waxy material covering leaves. The other thing that this whitefly leaves behind is sooty mold. That comes from a fungi, sooty mold, that grows on honeydew that's excreted from the insect. Yeah, and the ficus whitefly doesn't excrete the sooty mold, so that's one difference between the two. Whiteflies in general cause plant decline, defoliation, and branch dieback. Sooty mold can prevent photosynthesis and also harm the plant. So how do we solve whitefly? How do we keep it from spiraling out of control? The university recommends monitoring plants for early signs of infestation. It's going to be easier to manage the pest if you catch it early before it can build to a high population and cause major damage. If you have an infestation on a tree, also search nearby trees as well, because it has a really wide host range. It's likely lurking in multiple species. There are some natural enemies that predate on the whitefly, and there's potential for research to promote and enhance some of these populations of natural enemies. There's one parasitoid that's been identified, and I cannot pronounce the name. It's Aleroctonatus vittatus, or A vittatus. I don't know what the common name is, but I think it really needs one. That said, the go-to for treating this insect is using insecticides. That's the primary treatment. As far as insecticides go, for small infestations, you can try horticultural oils, but horticultural oils need to be applied and reapplied every 7 to 10 days. And they can't be applied on super hot sunny days because they can actually burn plants. But there are a lot of contact and systemic insecticides that have been approved for control of whitefly and that are effective. So this is a list, it's pretty long, of insecticides that are labeled for professional use against whitefly. I put this link up and I'll send you guys this PowerPoint. This link also has a list of insecticides that are approved for homeowner use. When selecting which insecticide I want to use, I would consider the type of plant first. So for a larger plant that has really complex leaves, systemic is going to work better and result in less application in the long run than a contact insecticide that you have to spray on the plant. So for example, for a tall palm, a systemic drench is going to be more practical than a contact because you're not going to be able to reach all the fronds. But I don't like to use systemics, especially not systemic neonics, on anything that's blooming or that has pollinators visiting. So I would consider that as well. And then another thing to consider with treating whitefly is the sooty mold. So sometimes you can treat the whitefly, but the sooty mold still stays behind until you manually remove it. So you can wash it off with a pressure washer. Because sometimes, you think you still have an infestation, but actually it's been treated until you remove the sooty mold. Okay. So third pest, the Asian ambrosia beetle, or AAB. In the US, this pest was first reported in South Carolina in the 70s. And since then, it's become established pretty much throughout the Southeast. And it's been found on over 120 different species of trees, shrubs, and vines. Some of its hosts that it will attack include crepe myrtle, mango, royal ponciana is what I see it on the most, mahogany, papaya, sea grape even, sweet gum. The adults chew round holes into the main stem or branch, and the giveaway that you're seeing an ambrosia beetle are these frass strings which protrude from the entrance holes. I call them frass cigarettes or frass strings. Some people say they look like toothpicks or something. And then the other thing is that branches and stems are usually attacked pretty low, about 1 to 3 feet above the soil line. So symptoms of the beetle activity are wilting of the foliage and eventually death of the plant. The beetle inoculates and carries with it a fungus. So it carries the fungus, it brings it into the tree and inoculates it. And that's what clogs the water pipelines of the tree, what we call it the xylem. My predecessor, Doug Caldwell, told me that he worked with a local nursery that had to destroy more than 200 mahogany trees because they were so severely attacked by this beetle. So what does the beetle actually look like? Adults are small. They're like 2 to 3 millimeters and they're this reddish brown color. Their heads are also kind of protruding underneath their thorax. So from above, you don't see their heads, you just see the two body parts, the thorax and the abdomen. They lay their eggs in a mass inside of the tunnel areas, and their eggs turn into larvae that are kind of like cream colored little grubs with brown heads. There's many species of bark beetle, and most just typically will deposit their eggs directly underneath the bark. This species, though, is one of the few that just tunnels straight into the center of the stem, which causes way more damage to the tree. So something unusual about the beetle is it's not consuming the plant tissue, right? It's transporting the spores of the fungus, which is this blue blackish colored thing we call ambrosia. And the beetle transports it into the core of the stem and grows it as a food source. And it actually feeds it to its larvae, which are emerging from those eggs. The adult beetles will also sometimes feed on the fungus as well, and they'll kind of carry it and pass it down from generation to generation. This kind of behavior, like taking care of your offspring, is not super common in insects. We see it with some pollinators, some other insect groups as well, but it's pretty unique for some of the beetles. The life cycle takes about 2 months. I would say just about like 6 or 7 weeks. And they can be several generations per year. Okay, so even though the Asian ambrosia beetle has been reported to attack healthy parts, we kind of think for the most part that the first line of defense is keeping trees healthy through practices like mulching, irrigating, fertilizing as needed. This might help plants recover as well if you can catch the infestation early. So any infested branches should be cut and burned or removed from the site to prevent reinfestation. And some folks can also kind of preventatively apply insecticides just before females fly in the spring to prevent a new infestation, and then repeat applications every couple of months. There's some borer and bark beetle products that have been used previously by folks like Dursban that are now not registered anymore. They haven't been shown to be effective. I've heard anecdotally that permethrin-based insecticides like Astra really work, but they need to be applied before adults bore into the tree. And that means that you have to monitor and look out for flying adults and treat at the first sight of them. How do you monitor when adults are flying? These beetles are actually attracted to ethanol. And you can find instructions online on how to make an alcohol-based trap in a soda bottle. It's called the Baker trap if you're interested. This beetle is also related to the red bay beetle, which was detected more recently in 2005. I think it was first detected in Duval County. And this one is a big threat to avocado trees and some other species. We know a lot less about the life cycle of this borer, but it's a threat because it's a vector of laurel wilt, which is a really damaging pathogen. Something we know about this beetle is that it doesn't just attack unhealthy trees, but it seems to target healthy trees as well. And it also leaves behind those frass strings. The beetle, like the other one, will drill into the tree, inoculate it with fungi, in this case, laurel wilt fungi, and then that's what it's feeding to its offspring. And what happens is basically the trees wilt, and within, I don't know, weeks to a few months, they really start declining severely. So folks are really worried about this who grow avocado. To avoid spreading it, what's suggested is not moving any infected trees off-site. I know trees need to be burned. They can be made into a mulch. It won't survive, the wilt won't survive in mulch wood chips. But generally burning is what folks say to do. And if you have trees that are not showing symptoms, but are present adjacent to infected trees, you can treat them preventatively with insecticides as well. Okay, so cycad scale. This is one I actually haven't seen yet. I think a lot of folks in my area have previously removed their sago plants because of this scale, but I'm curious if you guys come across this insect in Southeast Florida. Okay, so let's see. This scale is native to Thailand, and it was introduced to South Florida in 1995. And it's since spread rapidly to most of Florida as a pest of cycads. This insect is a sucking insect. It's related to insects like aphids and whiteflies and psyllids. And it's a serious pest because cycads are an ancient group of plants and gymnosperms. And nearly all species of cycad are actually considered threatened or endangered in the wild. The scale is also really good at moving around between places, international dispersal, because it's small and it's really hard to detect initial infestations. It also reproduces really well. Each female lays about 18 eggs a day. And then it also has very few natural enemies, especially in the areas where it's non-native and that it invades. And so its growth is basically unchecked. Cycad scale will feed on the aerial part of the plant and also on the roots as well. And what happens is, initial infestations appear as miscolored chlorotic spots on the undersides of the leaves. And this progresses into infesting the upper leaf surfaces, the petioles, the stems. And finally, infested plants become completely covered in layers of scales, both like living and dead scales just build up. It's sometimes described as a white crust. The scales deplete the carbohydrates, the food that the plant needs, resulting in the death of the plant. It's challenging to control CAS. Imidacloprid is not effective against it. It's less effective than these insecticides that I'm listing on this slide. There's always pros and there's always cons with every pesticide choice. So let's go through some of these insecticides. So distance is an insect growth regulator. It mimics insect hormones and it's less likely to harm beneficial insects such as ladybugs. However, it's a foliar drench and it works best when cycads are lightly infested. It's not going to work for severely infested plants. Dinotefuran is another option. It only requires a few applications, so that's nice, but it has pretty bad impacts to beneficial insects. And then there's horticultural oils. I like horticultural oils for homeowners because I feel like they're less likely to hurt themselves, but it needs to be applied every 7 to 10 days. And it's only really effective on newly hatched scales because newly hatched scales don't have a hard exoskeleton. It doesn't really work when there's a lot of mature insects or if there's a severe infestation. Another avenue of control potentially is predation by natural enemies. So in Collier County, where I'm at, there is a non-native beetle that actually consumes the scale and helps remove some of those dead scale layers on the plant surface. However, most natural enemies won't go near the scale because it's one of those insects that absorbs defensive chemicals from the cycad plant and it just doesn't taste very good. So right now in Florida, there's no natural enemy that is considered to provide adequate or complete control of the insect, unfortunately. Okay, we're just rolling through these. Ganoderma, this is one I get calls about, oh my gosh, every single week. People are so devastated when they get Ganoderma, and rightfully so. It's a shelf-like fungus that can be found on palm trees, usually on the lower 4 to 5 feet on the palm. And all palms are potential hosts to Ganoderma. It's a death sentence. Once an infected palm is diagnosed, it needs to be removed because it becomes a safety hazard once it dies. A lot of times when we think about plant pathogens, we expect them to hit trees that are already under stress, but not so with Ganoderma. This disease occurs equally in palms that have been maintained very well nutritionally and on palms that, are severely stressed by deficiencies. It occurs in well-drained soils, it occurs in swamps, it kills trees that are super healthy with no mechanical injury, and it also kills trees that have been, hurt, for example, by weed trimmers. It doesn't matter what the soil type is like, that has no relationship to the disease either. So basically, there's no discernible pattern to provide clues as to why some palms become infected and die and others do not. It's spread by spores through wind and water, and these spores can persist in the soil for years. And so for this reason, palm trees cannot be replaced with another palm. And I would say that's really what I'm getting asked about. I get residents calling me, what should I plant? And folks just really want to know a plant name, but it's usually more complicated than that. We want to encourage plants that work for the location, that take into account soil, moisture, light, and environmental conditions. Folks have different reasons for why they would want to plant. Perhaps they want flowers, perhaps they need a privacy screen. I'm not a Florida native, so I'm slowly learning more about the plants here. And I've kind of been keeping lists of plants that I like and that folks can use instead of palm trees. So I thought I'd go through some of my example plants, and you guys can pitch in with ideas too, whether you like my suggestions or not. Just throw it in the chat and we'll look at it later. Okay, so usually people want flowering trees that aren't too big. And one of the trees that I really like is the Geiger tree. We have a bunch of them here near downtown and in our botanical garden. Some folks say that it kind of looks iffy when it's not in bloom, but for me, the bloom really makes up for it. It's a beautiful orange flower, and the tree is drought tolerant, it's salt tolerant, it's native, it attracts hummingbirds. And then there's some other small to moderate size flowering trees on my list as well, that's cassius, for example. I think there's multiple trees that look quite lovely that folks can use. When it comes to larger trees, a couple of months ago, we really had a beautiful show from the silver trumpet trees in my town. These trees lose their leaves right before they bloom, and it results in the most stunning display of yellow flowers. I should have put a picture of it on the slide, but I didn't. They often have these really interesting crooked trunks as well. So they could be single specimen trees, or they can line property borders, or they can work as accents to a bed. And then there's a bunch of green textural trees that folks can use that aren't flowering, but I think that are still really interesting. Fiddle-leaf figs are something that I always grew in pots inside my home on the West Coast, and would tend them very carefully with a humidifier. I'll spray them every day and pray that they grow. And here they just grow outside. And I thought for sure, oh, this must be invasive or something, but according to University of Florida and their invasive plant list, it's not considered an invasive. I don't think everyone should be growing fiddle-leaf figs outside, but sometimes I see them, I think they look really beautiful. They add so much structure and texture to a landscape. The other tree I wanted to highlight was weeping holly. Florida holly trees can be popular, but this one, if you don't trim it much, it forms this weepy flowing shape. It's a very tough and hardy native plant. And then tropical accents. So a lot of times I see palms used between homes as privacy screens. And I think those conditions can be pretty perfect for fungal development. And in these areas, I think sometimes you kind of have to just replace the palm with accent plantings or flower beds instead. I see lots of crotons and crinums and bromeliads in this area. But one plant that I see less that I really, really like is American beautyberry. It has these stunning purple berries. It's a native plant and it provides food for birds. It's also drought tolerant. So I wish more people in my county would grow this plant. I also really like the native Florida lantana. It has really delicate white flowers, and I think it's nicer and more charming than its invasive counterparts. Okay, and then privacy hedges. So I put a link here, the tinyurl.com/hedges Southwest Florida. And it's this master spreadsheet that has a list of plants that can be used for privacy hedges and screens. And each plant has listed water and light requirements for the plant, information on its growth rate, pros and cons, common pests that it gets. This is put together by my colleague, Stephen Brown, who's an agent in Lee County. And I just wanted to recommend that you check this out. I think it's really, really helpful. And it goes through all kind of the common and uncommon privacy screens that we see. So it has information on sea grape, Clusia, Simpson stopper, cocoa plum, and more. And I just wanted to let you know, if you didn't know, that the University of Florida has a bunch of plant guides. So some of them are like online PDFs. Some are actually apps that you can download on your phone. So I just wanted to share this useful resource with you, and you can share it back with the public when they ask you about what plants to plant. Okay, so I am going to now move to talking about pollinators. I don't know if you guys want a second to ask questions, or should I just kind of continue on? What do you guys think?
There was a question out there from Greg Polidora, and his question was hardwood trees with Ganoderma, and can we suggest replanting them with more hardwood trees?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't heard of Ganoderma on hardwood trees, but I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that, because Ganoderma can subsist in the soil basically. And the concern is that it will live in the soil for up to 5 years in that spot. So it just makes kind of sense to plant something that's as different as possible. Something that you know is not susceptible to Ganoderma. So I would just stick with like something you know isn't going to get it. Is my like preliminary answer, but I can also get back to you on that.
Let me interject a little bit there.
Someone says it's not as detrimental, but it does happen on Ganoderma.
Right.
Oh, wow.
As you know, there are lots of Ganodermas, and the one that infects palms, and I'll blow the last name, Xanatum or whatever, starts with a Z. That is specific to palms.
Okay.
All the other Ganodermas, any rotten wood will host Ganoderma. That's just, there are literally hundreds of Ganoderma genus out there. So what Greg did, I think the answer you're looking for is if a palm died from Ganoderma, it's most likely Ganoderma Z. That is not going to impact or influence the hardwood. But I have a follow-up on that. Sometimes and oftentimes we see landscapes done with palms in let's say a straight row, an entry feature for a gated community or something, where they've got these elaborate long rows of royal palms, whatever it happens to be. And if they lose one there to Ganoderma, you can't put in a Geiger or a gumbo or anything else, because it really doesn't keep with the flow.
Yeah, that's so true. Yes.
We've been kind of stuck, and what some people were recommended, and this is my question, there's people out there that say that they can sterilize the soil chemically with everything from gasoline in a match to whatever chemicals they want to use, that will control the spores and thereby feel comfortable planting a palm in there. Has the university done any research on really the ability to get rid of spores?
I know that, I don't know if there's ongoing research on that, but I know currently there's nothing published or nothing reported publicly. And so the university stance would say that, we don't have a stance on sterilization methods in the soil. So it doesn't mean that folks can't try it, but there's no like recommendation there on how to do it or what's the safest way or what works the best. I haven't met anyone who's working on that at the university, and I haven't seen anything on it. Yeah, there are ways to sterilize the soil. There can be like fumigants sometimes used, but nothing that's been approved for Ganoderma specifically. Spores, I don't know much about Ganoderma spores. Some spores are really hard to kill, even with ethanol, and other ones you can. And I just don't think we know for Ganoderma. Folks can always try replanting a palm, but they should monitor it carefully for symptoms of decline, and then they may have to remove it again. So there's always that trade-off, and it can be an expensive proposition.
Understood. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then just on one of the other ones, you've got a lot of opinions out there on people anytime you talk to a bunch of arborists and talk about favorite trees. And it would be interesting to hear your list in 12 months because things change. You get down in some of the first ones to grab your eyes after you use them for a while, or they get popular. Sometimes opinions change. So in a year, we're gonna check up with your love of Hong Kong orchids and some of the other ones.
Totally. I know. I feel like it's just ones I'm seeing around commonly. And I'm like, I wonder what are really actually let me know what you guys actually like. I need to have better recommendations for people. But yeah, already my tastes have been changing while I've been here as I learn new things. The powder puff mimosa tree. I was like, oh, what a beautiful little tree. And then I found out it's considered invasive and
yes,
can't be planting that one. Oops.
They're great choices. So yep, you'll develop your own list, but we'll be anxious to hear them. I think that's the bulk of the questions. We've done excavation, fumigants. That's Tiffany, and 2 waiting periods. So there are people that are trying different things as far as the spores, and I think, as you said, there's no university-backed research. So what's happening is it's a roll of the dice, and people may be putting down, talcum powder. And if the next palm doesn't die, they swear that's the solution. And it has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
There was an initial fear, I think, from Dr. Elliott, that when a new palm was put in due to the cut root, it allowed the Ganoderma possible access to the new plant. So that was her concern, was the availability of the spores to the open roots. So I don't know the same thing. I'm not aware of any research on that, so that may or may not be a factor. But I know people go ahead and replant, especially when it's a landscape feature, and hit and miss, as you said.
Yeah, your audio is cutting a little bit in and out for me. I don't know if it is for anybody else, just so you know.
I apologize. Go ahead with your next session.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about bees, just because they're so fun and beautiful, and we have some time still. I have the chat room open. Does anyone want to guess how many species of bees there are in the world? Just throw out some numbers, and I'll read them out loud. 1,000 was one guess. 3,000. Any other guesses? Okay, so the answer is there's 20,000 different species of bees in the world. In Florida, there's about 315 or 320 species that have been described. In North America, I think it's 4,000 species right now. Each one of these images is actually of a different bee. We usually think about honeybees when we think of bees, but actually there's so many other species. Honeybees are really the main domesticated species. There's a couple other ones. The rest of the bees are wild bees, and many of them are solitary. They vary widely in their morphologies, in their behaviors, in their taxonomies. And many of these species are considered to be in decline. It's a little bit hard to know because it's hard to track them because they're solitary individuals. Sometimes they're really, really tiny bees. We know for a lot of bumblebees, which are large and easier to track, that their species are endangered and they're threatened. But just like the honeybee, all of these species do provide pollination. So what are bees? Bees are insects in the order Hymenoptera with the wasps and the ants, and they're found on every continent except Antarctica. They have these special branching hairs on their body, and that's what makes a bee a bee. Wasps and ants and other related insects don't have these branching hairs. So if you look at these really close up, like SEM pictures, each hair has these like sub branches, almost like a tree. And that's what allows pollen to get stuck to their bodies. And it's what makes them such excellent pollinators. Actually, I want to go back 2 slides. So if you look at this bee at the top right, that's Peponapis, the squash bee. Those little yellow things are pollen that's been stuck to its hair like Velcro because it has these special branching hairs. And then if you look at the picture at the top left, it almost looks hairless, but in fact, if you were to look closely at the legs, or if you looked under a microscope, you would see tiny, tiny little hairs all over this bee that are branched. Okay, so bees really range in size. At one end of the spectrum, there's Wallace's giant bee. That's the one on the right. It's found only in Indonesia. And this bee builds a communal nest inside of the active nest of tree-dwelling termites. And they use tree resin to build compartments inside of the termite nest. And it lays its eggs inside of those compartments. And those large jaws, they're not for biting, they're for collecting resin. They make these large balls of resin to make those compartments. And there's a honeybee next to it for a size reference. On the other side of the spectrum, you have a stingless bee, and that's like a super tiny little black bee. If you look at the honeybee next to it, it's almost like the length of the honeybee leg. So really, really quite variation in size of bees. Bees also range in their nesting preferences and habits. So most people, they think of bees living in colonies and they think of like honeybee boxes, but actually most bees live in the ground in these tunnels that they either dig, or they can be pre-existing tunnels left behind by other animals, by like mice or something. And that's one of the reasons why bee scientists worry about like systemic drench insecticides, because bees are actually exposed to a lot of soil. They carry soil in their mouths, they move it around, and it's one route of pesticide exposure. Other bees make their own nests by tunneling. And some live above ground in tunneled or pre-existing cavities inside dead branches and stems. Okay, and then bees also range in their morphology, how they look, and they carry pollen in different ways. So the bees on the left here have something called the scopa, which is a hair-like brush, and it can be on different parts of their body. So the bee on the top, the scopa, is on the back leg. The bee on the bottom actually has its scopa underneath its abdomen, and it'll lift up its abdomen and pack pollen using its legs onto its abdomen. The bee in the middle is a honeybee, and it has a pollen basket, and the scientific name for a pollen basket is called a corbicula. If you were to look at its back leg, it would have a smoothed out little dip, and that's what it will stick pollen to. And then the bee on the right doesn't have a pollen carrying structure on its legs. Does anyone want to guess why? I'll open the chat to see if anyone knows. Well, the answer is this is a parasitic bee. It does have hairs if you were to look at it closely under a microscope, but it doesn't need to carry pollen because it steals it from other bees. So this bee basically will go into the nests of other bees and lay its eggs inside of those nests, and its offspring is going to hatch, and it'll either eat the larva of its host bee or it'll eat the pollen of the host bee. So they can be, carnivorous. There actually also are other carnivorous bees that eat flesh. They're only found in the tropics, and there's only like 1 or 2 species. I'm blanking on the name of them, but they'll eat like decaying animals, like dead frogs and dead birds, and feed the flesh to their young. Okay, so bees in Florida, there's over 300 species, and I kind of put 2 side by side here. One of them is a native and one isn't, and they're both blue and they both look really different. So I kind of like this juxtaposition. The one on the right is Osmia calamithe, and this is a rare native bee. It's been listed as critically imperiled by some groups, and it's found only in a couple places in Florida. It's found in Marion County and Highlands County, and it has a very special relationship with one plant. It only collects pollen and nectar from Ash's calamint. And so if we lose this one plant, we're going to lose this bee. On the other hand, we have Euglossa dilemma, the green orchid bee, and it's a non-native from Central America. And now it's found throughout much of South Florida, at least where I am in Southwest Florida, I actually see them all the time. There's a couple species of Euglossa, but you can't tell them apart without looking at their mandibles, so very hard to tell. But they have these really unique legs. So this is a male, and its hind leg has that like enlarged, big swollen area. And that's because it's collecting horticultural oils and scents. And when it encounters a female, it's going to fan those out with its wings and try to attract and lure her with like the yummy, delicious, fragrant scents of flowers. So beyond being really unique and beautiful, we really need bees. Bees, carry pollen between flowers as they forage, and it's really accidental. They're collecting pollen for consumption, not for themselves, but for their offspring. But they're so messy, pollen gets all over their bodies, and that's what pollination is. Bees pollinate 130 different agricultural crops in the US, and some crops are so heavily reliant on bees that we just wouldn't have them at all if we lost our bees. And I like this image. It shows what the grocery store would look like if we didn't have bees. Bees forage during the day, so the best time to apply pesticides is often at dusk or dawn when they're asleep. This is especially true if you have honeybees nearby, because honeybees will go and sleep in their colonies and they're protected at night. But there are some bees that actually sleep in the soil next to plants, and there's even some that sleep inside of flowers, like the squash bee, Peponapis. The males sleep inside of flower plants at night. So they're kind of screwed even if you apply at dawn. But overall, a general rule of thumb is don't apply when you see bees actively foraging. There's been a lot of media about bees declining, and the pesticide that comes up the most are neonics. Neonics are a class of insecticides, and they're common because they're very selective and they're actually way more toxic to insects than they are to people. But the most widely used neonics are also really toxic to bees. So this includes dinotefuran, imidacloprid, and more. But now the EPA requires that products with neonics have a bee warning box on the label with instructions and a reminder to limit bee exposure. There's another class of pesticides that a lot of people don't think about being harmful to bees, but actually really are. And that class is fungicides, especially lawn fungicides for turfgrass. Fungicides have a direct negative impact on bees when they come in contact with them, but they also have indirect effects. Basically, some of them have been shown to disable the ability of bees to detox from chemical exposure. So it can actually amplify the negative impacts of some insecticides and make insecticide exposure worse for the bee. Sometimes we think like, oh, fungicides are for fungi, but actually it can be really, really harmful to our beneficial insects as well. So another thing that helps bees is using integrative pest management, which is a suite of tools to address pest problems. It starts with scouting and monitoring. It includes using biological control. It includes using cultural practices to prevent pest problems from getting really bad. IPM is safer for workers. It reduces pesticide resistance, so making sure that our pesticides actually work, and it's better for wildlife and the environment. This is kind of my plug. You guys are not in my county, but we're offering classes on IPM at our extension center. If you guys want to join my listserv to learn more about classes we have, some of them are on Zoom. So I have that link at the bottom there, and you'll get notifications from me when we have classes. I say we have classes like once or twice. Well, I send out emails like once or twice a month, and we have like, 1 or 2 classes a month as well. You can also contact me if you have a specific class that you really want, or if you have a license that you need to renew, and I can put a class together. And that's it on bees for me. I just try to really synthesize it and keep it short. How do I stop my share? There we go. And I'll take any questions that you guys have about bees or anything else, if I can answer them.
I'm hoping my audio is functioning correctly. If you're not hearing it right, I'm going to turn this over to Kevin.
We hear you now. Someone says I get a lot of euglossas. They like to steal propolis from my honeybee hives. Oh, I didn't know they did that. That's funny. Please put the link in the chat that she mentioned. Happy to. I can do that right now. So I'm going to put the link in the chat for joining my listserv. I'll try not to spam you too much, but like the emails actually go into your spam folder. I don't know why, so check there too. Oh, I just send it to everybody instead of send it to just one person instead of to everyone. Here we go. Yeah, I like bees. And actually those euglosses, those were the first bees I ever worked with as an undergrad. I was working with somebody who was rearing them inside of these like giant cages that just look like big laundry bags, and I have to go in there and feed them. And he was the one who discovered Euglossa dilemma and named it. And he named it Euglossa dilemma because it was such a dilemma to him. There's another Euglossa species, and he noticed this one was just a little bit different. It had a different mandible, and he was so confused, and that's why he named it dilemma, Euglossa dilemma.
Dr. Cohen, I have a question. What do you consider the major factors that it's driving pollinator decline?
Yeah, so I mean, some people say it's a little bit different for honeybees and wild bees, but for wild bees, there's 3 factors that are considered the major factors. So the first one is lack of habitat and lack of flowers. You know, bees need pollen and nectar for food, and we're changing our landscapes rapidly. With urbanization, you know, we see a lack of nesting area for them. No one likes to have messy, unkept yards with dead plants, but bees and a lot of birds need some dead plants to nest in as well. And then flowers, you know, we grow a lot of like sterile plants that don't provide food for them. Large scale farming systems, like when I worked in California, you worked on these big monoculture farms where you can only see one crop for miles and miles and miles. It's all almond or all sunflower. And they actually provide a lot of bee food, but only for a very, very narrow window. So there's not food throughout the year, and there's not a diversity of food in these landscapes. So okay, that's a big one, habitat loss. The second one is parasites and pathogens. So bees are vulnerable to over like 20 RNA viruses: Israeli acute paralysis virus, deformed wing virus, black cell queen virus, and they can spread between different species. They're not just in honeybees. There's some parasites and pathogens that are only in honeybees, like varroa is only honeybees, but a lot of the viruses are in all bees. There's fungal parasites like Nosema or Ascosphaera, Aspergillus, those kind of like chalk brood parasites. Those are in wild bees as well. And then there's like microsporidians like Crithidia. So lots of parasites and pathogens. And then there's a third pressure, which is agrochemicals. Bees are more vulnerable than other insects to pesticides. And I remember seeing a study that really showed like they have a different set of like detoxification genes than other insects. And so they don't do well with them. And then you have all 3 things that interact. So if you think of yourself, let's say you get a virus, like a cold virus, most likely you're going to get over it. You're going to stay at home, have chicken soup, whatever. But if you're being doused in like pesticides or even just like a little bit of exposure here and there, and you only have one kind of food and you're hungry, that's going to turn into pneumonia. So it's the same with these bees. A lot of the viruses and parasites, they can fight off, but not when they're also faced with these other pressures all together. And we've shown that really in lab studies, especially, you know, they've taken bees and put them through these different stressors. Yeah, I was involved in a study on big farms that showed that when there's only like one kind of flower, you tend to see more sick bees, but even adding in hedgerows or strips of annual flowering plants with different kinds of flowers reduces parasitism of bees. Bees spread parasites. I can talk about this forever. Bees spread parasites and pathogens through flower visits. It's almost like flowers are the doorknob of the bee world, right? Like the dirty doorknob. Even let's say like a sick bumblebee visits a flower, it can like poop or drop off like parasites and virus particles and then leave, and then a different species can come and pick up that disease. And so if you have different kinds of flowers vary in their ability to host and harbor parasites and pathogens that can kind of break up the transmission. That is the whole point of the story, is diversity of flowers is good, kind of like using the same few plants over and over again in our landscapes and in our farms is not. Yeah, so anything we can do to provide food for them. It's not always necessarily native plants. They'll take pollen and nectar from non-native plants as well.
I love the dirty doorknob scenario. That makes very good sense. That's excellent. I don't know if you are familiar with Dr. Jared Daniels at UF.
I am, yeah. He's done work with pollinators and with butterflies as well. I actually haven't met him yet. It's been on my to-do list to actually like talk with him one-on-one. I'm so far away from Gainesville, but he's done work on the Atala butterfly, which I've been learning about.
I was listening to a podcast with him, and he brought up, and I guess actually he's curator of the Natural History Museum at the university. And they came up with a idea about big areas for butterflies and bees and wasps as pollinators, and that was roadside grasses, the roadways, the highway grasses. And they did an extensive research about just mowing them less. I think the mow was, say, every 3 weeks, and they doubled it to 6. And the amount of insects out there and the pollinators and all just skyrocketed, skyrocketed.
I haven't seen that study, but I saw kind of a similar one with turf grass. And it was looking at turf grass that was mixed with perennial peanut or mixed with like other ground covers. They did some tests. And they found like, okay, like you're seeing all these beneficial insects, pollinators, but also like natural enemies of common pests when you diversify your turf lawns. Like 2% of the entire United States is covered in turf grass, which means it's actually one of the largest like crops really in the US. And so can we get people to adopt turf or, areas that have more flowers? We're going to need different management practices for growing these kind of landscapes or for growing these roadside medians that look different, but we can provide for a lot more animals. I'm just like a hippie. I just think the world isn't just for us. We need to like protect it for all the animals around us as well. So I'm always thinking about that. I know it's easy to say because I'm not actually a landscaper. I don't have a business that depends on what I do day to day. But my goal is just to get people excited and passionate about biodiversity so that they start thinking about how to conserve it in their day-to-day work.
So as landscape inspectors, contractors, and all that LIAF represents, what would you say are the biggest things we could do to help protect the pollinators and encourage them?
I think the biggest challenge that I've seen people come across is working with clients. Some clients are there. They really want to support pollinators and wildlife. They're worried about exposure to pesticides from their own standpoint, but other people are very much like, no, I want my lawn to look perfect, or I want my plant to look perfect. Any damage is unacceptable. And so that's really what it is changing perceptions and getting folks to accept that nature isn't pristine and sterile and perfect. We can tolerate losses, and there's times when using pesticides is really appropriate to prevent bigger issues. There's other times that maybe we can let a plant go so that we can kind of help the environment instead. So I think that's the hardest thing. I don't know. You can also think about some of the plants that you're planting and look up, is this something that provides pollen and nectar? If it never flowers, or if the flower is very sterile without pollen, then that's maybe not the best choice for a pollinator. I wish HOAs would do little pollinator gardens, but I haven't seen that trend really taking off. But I see it at universities, at different businesses, local parks. A lot of them have these beautiful pollinator gardens. So I think that's a great idea.
And I think you're correct. I think if that can be sold as a pollinator garden, and you have butterflies, bees may not be quite as lovable to your average
butterfly
resident.
garden. Yeah, if it helps butterflies, it helps bees too. So usually,
yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
I would agree with that. What about I heard you mention diversity. So if we are looking to do large scale landscapes, a commercial landscape, things along those lines.
Yeah.
What would you say represents diversity? 3 plants, 5 plants, or is it better just to stick with one?
It depends on what the whole landscape looks like. So when I think about like pollinators, some pollinators can travel 14 miles. Other ones are limited to 500 meters of foraging range. So those ones that are limited to 500 meters, that's not a big area. So you want to be able to provide not so much like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 plants, but plants that bloom year round in different seasons is more important than the number of species. And the other thing that's important is enough of each plant. So I've seen some pollinator gardens that were very well intentioned, but they'll put like one sunflower in one corner, another in another corner, some lamiaceae here, some lamiaceae there. Bees actually really like clusters. They're always thinking about energetics when they make decisions about where to forage. And they're more likely to visit and benefit from and not get so tired if you cluster all your like lavenders together, all your mints together, all your sunflowers together. And so that's one thing I'd like to see people kind of doing a little bit more. So there's clustering, there's year-round bloom, and then the other thing is nesting habitat. There's been quite a few studies showing that in urban gardens, the more mulch there is, the less bees there are because they can't dig through mulch. They're not able to with their little legs. So how do you solve that? Well, I've noticed bees often nesting underneath fences and in undisturbed areas. So for a homeowner thinking about, is there an area of a garden that I can just leave a little bit wild, undisturbed, so that insects can go in and out of the soil without being run over?
Interesting, interesting. Okay, and the year-round makes perfectly good sense. So as opposed to just attracting in the months of spring, you're saying go for plants that bloom year-round.
Yeah. Yeah, because bees have, and like, so bees usually live for about 2 months, but there's like spring bees, there's summer bees, there's fall bees. So they're not all around all year. And then honeybees are around all year, but it's just different generations. So.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah, it says I'm muffled again, so I'm going to stop talking. Kevin, I'm going to turn it over to you since my speaker is not exactly working. But Dr. Cohen, I thank you personally very much. Excellent presentation, and if you see some things in the chat box that you're getting some rave reviews. So thank you very much.
Oh, thanks, guys. I feel a little bit like a fraud. Like I'm new to Florida, so I don't know much about your pests yet. But hopefully, I had some cool facts that were new to people.
The pests will come introduce themselves. Don't worry.
Okay, sounds good.
Kevin, I'm turning this over to you.
Why? No. Well, I don't know that we had a heck of a lot to add. That was a great presentation, and I mean the engagement there was tremendous in the chat box. Is Henry on? Do you see? Did you see him at all, Bill? Okay, perhaps not. Well, with that, we were trying to keep our meetings down to a level hour and a half. Where the other ones were getting a little onerous, but we are perhaps a little bit early today, but that's okay too. I mean, everybody's got fun stuff to get back to, I'm sure. I wanted to give Henry an opportunity to speak if he had anything that was important or relevant. I'm just going to check the chat to make sure that's not Henry. It's Dad, and he's not here. Thank you very much, Don.
Kevin,
So with that, I think we will conclude the meeting.
Kevin.
Yes, sir.
Quatisha is there, and Quatisha is a DADE board member. I don't know if she has anything to add.
We could unadjourn her, and can you handle that there, Rich?
What is her name?
Quatisha?
I'm going to spell it badly, aren't I?
No, just start with Q.
Oh, cute. See, that's why.
I've requested she unmute. We'll see if she does.
So did I. Well, while we're waiting, we do have the link up to register for the last day of the month for next month, June 2022, for the next meeting on the website. And there's a link in the chat if anybody wants to register now, so we can start seeing people already. That would be great.
Good plan.
I hope I'm not muffled because it's hard for me not to speak. So I hope I'm not muffled. But I second what Richard's saying. You can always sign up. You don't need to wait to see the flyer. Every month I promise to get the flyer out a little earlier, and I will work on that as things are settling down. But we have religiously, is the only term I can come up with, had meetings on the last Thursday of every month. So please don't wait to see the flyer. Get out there, sign up. And if you have other great speakers, we've been very fortunate with the speakers we come up with. If you've got some that you've heard, please let me know and I will reach out to them. All right.
Excellent idea. And I'm sure we've got a tremendous number of folk who are involved in all across the, see, and Mr. Rivera is ready to help chime in as well.
Oh.
Tisha? Oh, she must not be sitting right there, or doesn't really have anything to share, which is also fine. But again, with that, be mindful that we are going to be pushing out the certification. Thank you, George. Thanks, Tiff. We're going to be pushing out the next certification information soon enough. And again, we are going to have, I think, as an offshoot of this, some more review on grades and standards. And again, please feel free to reach out on getting the grades and standards thing. There was also Donna Castro was very kind enough to add in the chat box, if you didn't see it, it's sort of the crib sheet, if you will, of what changed from grades and standards 2015 to grades and standards 2022. So it's a real short, easy thing to go and say, oh, okay, well, that's what's different. But if you're still not familiar with what grades and standards are, again, happy to send that out to you. And it is the sort of linchpin piece of knowledge that the landscape inspectors hang their hat on. So with that, thank you.
Kevin, I thank you, and Hamatal, I certainly thank you. I see you're on it. You may be mute. Oh, you're back. Again, we appreciate it very much. Thank you for taking the time. Welcome to Florida. And if there's anything the Landscape Inspector Association can do for you moving forward, please feel free to reach out to us.
Oh, thank you so much. I'd love to stay involved.
Excellent. Thank you. And again, welcome to Florida.
Thank you.
To membership, to general membership, I think we're at a very good point right now where through the work of Kevin, his entire committee, and including Mike and Henry, Peggy and some others, the certification is moving forward very well. And what we're looking to be able to do is continue to have these certification tests, not just in the South Florida area, but moving through some other portions of the state. Kevin's had some requests up, was it the Tampa area, Kevin?
We talked about Tampa. We've been speaking with Susan Haddock, who is at the extension office up there, and who is, by the way, a certified landscape inspector. She came down here to take that test. She's more of a turf person, which is interesting. But her cohorts, who are more in plants and trees, we would love to get them more involved and some energy there. And we've had inquiries from other professionals in and around the West Coast. So, maybe for now it's a broader base West Coast again, which is, you've got Hamatal in Collier County, you've got Collier and Lee, then whatever's in between that, and Hillsborough and Pinellas. So sorry, I don't know all the counties in Florida. I used to know, but yeah, there's a ton of development going on there. Greg's making a great point that this is the kind of thing where stuff is being built left and right and everywhere, and having it be the right thing in the right place, that's the right plant that meets the minimum standard of what should be in the ground is critical. St. Augustine is no less susceptible to hurricanes than we are, or storms, or drought, or whatever. I mean, all of the stuff that affects South Florida, I'm sure affects St. Augustine. So, anywho, well, that was all I really had to share.
Okay, you make a good point, Kevin, and to bring it back to Hamatal's topics, that would be, what can we do to help with even pollinators and such? I think statewide, if we as the green industry get good material in the ground, then, and it survives and grows, that's going to help everything. That's going to help move the rock, because where new development's going on, if it's not done well, then it's void of insects and pollinators and bugs and bunnies for a number of years. So we as landscape inspectors and installers and growers, if we help get that material done and those plans drawn up right, I think it'll work. That will be the biggest contribution we can make.
I love to see the idea of us getting up into more North Florida as well too, but you know, baby steps, we'll get there. But having great people spread the word on the West Coast, I think is a great start, and having our allies at the extension offices and the great folks from UF-IFAS have always been a tremendous help to our organization. And you know, I expect we'll keep leaning on them, and more close to home. Dr. Orphanides and Henry Mayer are, again, just two of the greatest guys who love what they do, and they love helping all of us do what we do. So I got to take my hat off to them as well.
Agreed, and throw Donna in there too, because Donna's contributing. And for those of you that are not yet getting the emails from Donna and the newsletter, please reach out to her. There's some very valuable information coming across your computer delivered to you, and those are the kind of things that we're hoping everybody is going to utilize to become more wise about our industry.
Donna's got a lot of great information she's putting out all the time, so I'll second that. Definitely keep an eye out for those things. There's some great stuff.
Absolutely. So to kind of wrap this up, to everyone, please, if you're not certified, consider becoming certified. If you are certified, remember you need to keep your CEUs up. These meetings will give you one, but so will other things put on by LIAF and other things sanctioned by LIAF, because we encourage you to learn from a number of sources. So become certified, participate in educational things to keep your CEUs up, pay your dues, and attend meetings. We're going to have a meeting again the last Thursday of next month, and then you'll be getting information about the seminar. So that's it from this end. If anybody ever wants to reach out, we are available on the website. You can link to that, and it bounces right to my email directly. So thank you all for attending. Good crowd today, good questions, and nice seeing you all. Have a great month. We'll see you next month.
Bye, Mr. Burns.